GANEP is the basis of savory Balinese cooking as sofrito is to Spanish cooking. So with this one spice paste, you've unlocked one of the lesser-known international flavors that's both exotic and delicious. Although there are many subtle variations, some of which use indigenous ingredients that you can't get outside of Indonesia, this version is instantly recognizable as authentic to anyone familiar with Balinese cuisine. There are quite a few ingredients, but the cooking is simple enough, and once you have the spice paste, you can store it in the refrigerator and use it to quickly build dishes. An example is shown at the end of this video.
I've got most of the ingredients we're going to use here. There's the turmeric. In this mortar, I've got a quarter teaspoon each of white peppercorns, black peppercorns, cumin, coriander seeds, and nutmeg that's going to be ground up by hand in just a moment here with a pestle. I've got a small handful of fresh coriander, generous 2 teaspoons of dark brown sugar or palm sugar. This is the shrimp paste, using macadamia nut oil because the original recipe uses candle nuts, which you can't get. But macadamia nuts are similar. I'm not using macadamia nuts themselves, though we also need some oil. So I'm just going to use macadamia nut oil and kind of fuse the taste together here. It'll work just fine. I have lemongrass, which I'm going to cut up in just a second. I'll show you. The ginger, shallot, 40 grams of shallot, 1 or 2 whole red chilies. Just cut the stems off, but leave the seeds in. If you want it really mild, use a little bit less than 1, but then it'll be seriously mild. The original recipe in Bali would use about 4 of these. Now, lemongrass, you just take a knife and you run down, make a little cut so you can peel it. I'm going to show you the relative proportions of all the coarsely chopped vegetables. You have to do these first this way so that they can be ground up finely in the stick with the stick blender. If you don't chop them up a little bit, you'll have like large pieces that won't cut. So we have the lemon, especially true of the lemongrass. You need to really chop this up. Lemongrass, the ginger, the garlic, cilantro or coriander, as it's also known, shallot, and red chili. Of course, the amount of red chili will vary according to your tastes. So these will all get put in the stick blender with the other ingredients. I have ground up already in the mortar. I already ground the spices. The reason you do this in a mortar instead of with an electric spice mill, as I usually do, is because the electric spice mill will make it too fine. We don't want a super fine powder because it'll burn. So I'm going to grind the spices, not coarse, beyond coarse, but not as fine as an electric spice mill. Okay, salt was the last thing I put on top. Now I'm going to put this dried coconut. 2 hefty tablespoons of that. You can go a little bit heavier. I think 2.5 is okay. And then the macadamia nut oil, it's 50 milliliters. And you begin heating a non-stick skillet. I've got it on 6 out of 10. It's not super hot yet because we want to fry this gently. Just don't want to. We're not looking to caramelize the outside with heavy heat because that'll just burn the spices. Normally, you would use a product called Indonesian. It has a few other names, but that's probably not going to be available to you because it's almost impossible to get outside of the area. So I'm just going to use a regular bay leaf. No, it's not the same. The flavor is different, but it's better than nothing at all. And just keep cooking it gently. Move the bay leaf around. Make sure it's in contact with different parts of it as it cooks. I'm going to drive off most of the moisture. A few minutes later, you can see it's in about 4 minutes actually. You can see it's starting to get some browning on here, so you got to keep it moving around. It's been 6 minutes now. You can see this is darkened. Now I'm turning the heat off. but I am going to keep stirring it on the same pan with the residual heat for another couple of minutes before I transfer it off. But at this point it needs quite a bit of stirring. You want to make sure that nothing overcooks. I removed the bay leaf and I'm just put it in a little dish like this to cool off. So into pan here, non-stick pan, I'm adding a little bit of oil and some shallots. We're going to start these cooking first before we move on to the meat here. I'm just doing a small amount here to show you as an example. I've got 150 grams of ground pork there. How much of this you add is up to you. And then you need to begin mixing this together. Massage it together. A couple minutes, the onions have began to cook a little bit. We got some color here. Now I'm adding all the meat in. Begin breaking it up. Not really onion, by the way, that was shallot. I keep calling it onion. Heat's on about 6 out of 1 to 10 right now. As you're doing this, and you got it broken up, make sure that you've got a period where it sits and you don't stir it so that it can get some good browning on at least one side. You really want it to be browned nicely. I can still see some pink inside when I break up the larger pieces. There's still some pink, so I'm going to let it brown a little bit more first. Then, when you're satisfied that it's nicely brown, which you can actually tell mostly from the sound when you stir it, how crisp it is. Then it's time to add coconut milk in, coconut cream. I'm using a canned one. Fresh would be better, but this works just fine. Fresh cilantro.
In actual Balinese cuisine, this would be an example of a dish that might be served as part of a nasi campur, like this. I'm very pleased to announce the release of Volume 3, The Focus on Food Chemistry. I want to clear up a few things about these 3 volumes. First, they all contain completely different information. There's no duplication, they're not revisions. When I wrote Volume 1, I had 2.5 years of YouTube videos to cover. People had been asking me for the printed list of ingredients for all of those dishes, and so I obliged. There are recipes with stepwise directions and many tips offered throughout, as well as an extensive history of Russian cuisine over the last 1,000 years, but Volume 1 is very different from Volume 2 and 3. In Volumes 2 and 3, I only had about 9 months of YouTube recipes to cover in each, so I was able to provide stepwise directions for everything. In Volume 2, I included a lot of additional information about cooking and some simple examples of flavor chemistry to set the stage for Volume 3. While Volume 2 hopefully got you thinking about some of the processes that go on in cooking and how flavors are expressed and sensed at the molecular level, the topic was painted with pretty broad strokes to make it easy to digest, pun intended. Volume 3 is a milestone of the series, in which I have included an entire introductory course in food chemistry, which is why Volume 3 is about 70 pages longer than Volume 2. And if you just want the recipes, that's okay too. You don't have to read the first few chapters, but if you've ever been curious about what influences tastes and flavors and the rationale for deciding cooking times and temperatures, and why things taste different when they're combined in different ways, this book will answer many of those questions. It also paves the way for Volume 4, which will be next year. I'm pleased to announce a new, completely different type of cookbook. If you watch my channel regularly, you know that the recipes I present are usually centered on meat or seafood and seldom vegetarian dishes. This new book is a departure from that norm. Only vegetables, fruits, eggs, and dairy are used in dozens of recipes here. The key here is that these recipes don't taste like typical vegetarian food. This isn't a bunch of salads and bean sprouts wrapped in pita bread. These are completely satisfying, hearty dishes that use the science of food chemistry to produce meat-like aromas and flavors. But don't worry, there's no weird chemicals involved, just ordinary foods and spices that you can get in any grocery store. This really is an entirely new approach. These are flavorful, filling meals produced by a distinctive cooking method and unexpected combinations of ingredients. Once you see how it's done and understand the method, you can apply these preparations to some of your own recipes and transform them into vegetarian dishes too. Also look for my cocktail book, Cocktails of the South Pacific and Beyond, Advanced Mixology, available through Amazon online. If you want to know more about my adventures as a chef around the world and have some great laughs along the way, be sure to check out the video tour of my book, 40 Years in One Night. It's up on YouTube right now. Click the link.